My name is Vanessa Tutos. I would like to welcome all of you to our Texas chapter for Clean Energy for Biden main fundraiser featuring Beto O'Rourke and Rick Duke. I've asked everyone to mute their lines, and Beto's going to make some remarks to start off with, and then we'll open it up to Q&A. If you would kindly put your questions in the chat, I'll be able to moderate those after Beto's remarks. As I think everyone knows, Beto O'Rourke is former congressman from El Paso. He's a strong champion of clean energy, of jobs, of climate action. And I think he really needs no further introduction. So Beto, I'll turn it over to you. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, Vanessa, thank you for inviting me. And thanks for organizing this. And I understand we have a lot of people who have tuned in, a lot of people who have contributed to ensure that Joe Biden is the next president of the United States. And a lot of people who are on who have not yet made a contribution, who will, I hope, by the end of this, especially after they have a chance to listen a little bit more to you and to Rick Duke and to some of the others who are going to be participating in the event today. So thank you for doing this, and thank you for including us. I just cannot think of a more important thing for us to be focused on and to be doing now that we are 27 days away, 27 days, less than 4 weeks from the first day of early voting in Texas, October 13th. And I think 48 or so days away from Election Day, November 3rd. And as I was sharing with Vanessa earlier, I have come to the conclusion, and this is a transition that many of us in Texas have made, that this state is not a nice to win state for the Democratic nominee, Joe Biden, but a must win state, and one that he can certainly win as long as all of us are doing our part. If you follow the polls, 538, for example, does this kind of longitudinal tracker of all the major polls on the presidential race in Texas. They have, for the last couple of weeks, had Biden and Trump within a point of one another. Sometimes Biden's up by a point, sometimes Trump is up by a point. And who the hell knows what polls really mean in this day and age, but I do think it's indicative or reflective of what is possible in Texas right now. Many of you know, because many of you helped us in 2018 to come within 2.5 points of Ted Cruz. And just while we're on the topic of polling, on the eve of that 2018 election, most polls had me down 8 or 9 points going into that election. We lost by 2.5, so we outperformed the polls by 6+ points. Remember that when you see these polls over the next month and a half in Texas, as they tighten or move a little bit, remember that they tend to undercount Democrats, and specifically they undercount Latinos and Black Texans in this state, in part because they have so long been suppressed and intimidated and marginalized in the political process. And there's a consequence in the polling. But at the end of the day, in 2018, we won more votes than had any Democrat in the history of the state of Texas. We saw 12 new state house reps, all Democrats replacing long-serving Republicans. 2 new members of Congress, Democrats Colin Allred and Lizzie Panel Fletcher, also replacing long-serving Republicans for United States Congress, and really a major shift in turnout in Texas. We had ranked 50th, dead last in the United States in voter turnout on the eve of that election. And then we blew every record out of the water on election night in 2018. Largest voter turnout since 1970. In a midterm. You had young voters turn out at a 500% increase over the last midterm election, 500% growth right there. And then populations in Texas that have long been actively suppressed by the force of law, including Latinos and Black Texans, also turned out in record numbers. And so when you think about that in the context of this 2020, really what we did was set the stage or reveal what is possible for Texas. And as I was sharing with Vanessa earlier, 2018, a midterm, those cycles tend to favor Republicans. Republicans turn out at a greater rate in midterms than do Democrats. We're now in a presidential election cycle, which tends to boost Democratic voter performance. And that is also within the context of historic mismanagement by our president, a Republican, of the response to the COVID pandemic, which has killed nearly 200,000 of our fellow Americans. And in our state, where we've lost nearly 15,000 of our fellow Texans due to the ineptitude of our governor, and deaths that have been borne disproportionately by Latino communities and other communities of color in Texas. In other words, if ever there were the desire or the demand for change in this state, it is at this time in the most critically important election of our lifetimes. On top of all that, we have some extraordinary candidates who are running for office in Texas. And I know that you're going to meet, or if not meet, know that they're on this call, Angela Brewer and Janet Dudding, who are two extraordinary Democratic candidates who are going to win their races and help to form that necessary new Democratic majority in the state house, where we are only 9 seats down, a majority that will dismantle that infrastructure of suppression and intimidation and allow us to move forward on expanding access to healthcare in the least insured state in the country, reducing gun violence deaths in a state that saw the massacre in El Paso, the massacre in Midland, Odessa, the massacre in Sutherland Springs, the massacre at Santa Fe High School, and so many others. There's not a state, I don't think, that understands the consequences and cost of gun violence like Texas. I'd like us to be the state that leads on addressing this and fixing this. And then on the issue of climate, tell me a state that understands climate better than Texas. More than 3 years after Hurricane Harvey, there are some parts of Houston and Port Arthur and Southeast Texas that are not yet fully rebuilt. I think that Hurricane Harvey marked the rainfall record in North America for as long as records have been kept about rainfall in North America. And what the scientists tell us is that hurricanes like Harvey are going to become more frequent and more intense and more destructive, and will take the lives of more of our fellow Americans, more of our fellow Texans, because of our contributions to the warming of this planet, our excesses, our emissions, and our inaction politically in the face of the facts, the science, and the truth. And then there's this. This is all connected to, I talked about the voter suppression along racial lines, the racial gerrymandering that exists in Texas. The best predictor of your proximity to a polluter in the state of Texas is the color of your skin. And so at this time that we are losing so many of our fellow Texans to COVID, you think about the underlying conditions exacerbated by climate and by pollution and the lack of leadership that we've seen thus far on these important issues in Texas. And you understand that we need new leadership. And that's not just me saying it. It is the millions of our fellow Texans that we are reaching out to. Our organization, Powered by People, has made 30 million voter contact attempts in the state of Texas alone, just in the last 4 or 5 months. We are literally reaching out to every likely Democratic voter, and then a hell of a lot of Republican and independent voters as well in this state, to make sure that they're registered, to make sure that they're committed to voting for Democrats, and to make sure that they know the issues that we face and the change that we can enjoy. 2 last things. First, if we all do our part in organizing in Texas and raising money in events like this one, not only will Janet and Angela, and I believe John Rosenthal, who's a sitting member of the state house who's on this call, not only will they win their elections and help to produce a majority that we can be proud of and move forward on confronting climate change before it's too late, along with so many other important issues. As they expand and energize and electrify the electorate, they will send voters up ballot, kind of turning the idea of coattails on its head. Instead of waiting for a top ballot candidate to send voters down, they'll send voters up ballot to the congressional races, to the US Senate race, and to the all-important presidential race, where Joe Biden has the opportunity to become the first Democratic nominee to carry Texas's electoral college vote since Jimmy Carter did it in 1976. It's been 44 years. And tell me another event on election night that would be as seismic and profound as Texas coming in for Biden. I really do think that would turn the page on Trump and Trumpism and allow us to begin the next necessary new chapter for this country within a Biden administration. Now, the last thing, when I was traveling Texas in the 254 counties in 2018, one of the places I got to spend some time in is Roscoe, Texas. Fairly rural, fairly Republican. Well, in fact, so red you can see it glowing from outer space. When we went to Roscoe High School, the mascot of which is the Plowboys and the Plowgirls now. We learned that 90% of the students at Roscoe High are graduating with an associate's degree. So 18 years old, you walk across that stage, you get your high school diploma, you also get an associate's degree, 2 years of college, and you're 18 years old. And remarkably, a number of those students who are graduating with an associate's degree are also graduating with a remote FAA pilot's license, because there is such high demand for people to pilot the drones that do the maintenance inspections on the wind turbines that dominate the landscape in Roscoe, Texas. This community that was bleeding out youth and talent and intellectual capital was able to retain the best and brightest, really almost everyone, because they made a big bet on wind, on renewable energy. And these ranches that were about to be sold or auctioned off or foreclosed upon, subdivided, paved over, now have a necessary new revenue stream that's keeping them alive and has so deepened the property tax base in Roscoe that the school district can fund associate's degrees for every single student and graduate all these talented young women and men who are staying in that community and enriching it even further by their presence. I was asked a great question by Jeff just before we got started. How do we tell the story about the need to transition to wind and to solar renewable energy and to confront climate before it's too late? And it is jobs, jobs, jobs. And that's what we saw in Roscoe, Texas. That's what we see all across this state. And it's why I'm so pleased that Joe Biden has made that central to his plan to make sure that we are a leader on climate, not just for this country, but globally. So again, Vanessa, Rick, everyone who brought this together and is participating in this event today, thank you for including me. Thank you for raising this money for the Biden campaign. And thank you for working so hard to make sure that Texas comes in for him on November 3rd. Looking forward to the conversation. Thanks.
Thank you, Beto. We have a number of great questions that have come in. I hope we can get to all of them. So let me kick it off with one that really dovetails with what we talked about earlier in the conversation. We're here supporting clean energy. And the big question is, from Enrique Rosero, what is the actual clout of the oil and gas industry? And do you think that they will relinquish their political power, or that we will force them to relinquish that power so that renewables can thrive?
Yeah, Enrique, I appreciate the question. I mean, there are probably people on here who are better able to answer this, but intelligently, but I'll just give you a quick stab. I've had a chance as a fellow Texan to talk to people who work in the oil and gas industry, from the lowest paid jobs to the folks who sit in the boardrooms. And what I have found to be common amongst all of them and amongst all of us is that they've got kids and they've got grandkids, and they're not immune to the science and to the facts, and it concerns them as well. And you have some legitimate partners who, in good faith and with goodwill, want to do the right thing. You also have some who cannot see beyond the bottom line and the profits and their responsibility, their immediate responsibility to the next quarter and to their shareholders. And those are the bad actors who do not operate in good faith, and who do, if we're going to be honest with each other and go into this eyes wide open, pose a very serious obstacle and a real threat to us and those generations that follow us. So you kind of gave me an either or, do we work with them or do we overcome them? And I think it's going to be both. I think we find partners wherever they are. And I think we always reach out to and listen to people. I was remembering earlier a town hall in the Permian Basin, talking to a voter in the Midland, Odessa area who works in the oil and gas industry and wants us as a country and as a state to do the right thing, but worries about what that means to him and his family and his ability to put food on the table. And we've got to speak to him and make sure that we address his concerns and ensure that he's included in the conversation, has a seat at the table, and has a future in this economy, especially as we transition very, very quickly to renewable energy and electrifying our grid and all the important things that the Biden plan proposes. And then where you have obstinance and intransigence, where you have those who will not work towards the public good, then there have to be consequences, legislative, enforcement, and then public opinion and the will of the people. And all of that is part of what we're expected to do as citizens, and what we expect the Biden administration to do as the next administration leading this country. And we won't just hope that they do that. I think all of us, while we support Joe Biden to the hilt, we also are going to hold him accountable, and we're going to make sure that he actually enacts this incredibly ambitious agenda. And he'll need our support to do that. So that's the way that I approach it, Enrique. Thanks for the question.
Thank you for that. Our next question is from Cyrus there we go. Okay, from Cyrus Tasakori. This is going to draw on your experience in Congress, Beto. If we are successful in electing Joe Biden and we take the Senate, the Democratic agenda is really going to be limited to executive action unless we abolish the filibuster. So to do that, we obviously need 51 Democratic senators. We don't have that many votes in support. What are your thoughts on how we achieve that so we can actually create the game-changing policy that we need this after November?
Yeah, the map looks pretty favorable towards getting a Democratic majority, like not slam dunk, not a for sure thing. And all of us have to do our part in these incredibly important Senate races, including in Texas, where MJ Hagar in the latest poll is only 4 points down from John Cornyn. She can win this. And with your help, much better chance that she will. I think, my best case scenario for the Biden administration is that it is an FDR administration for the 21st century, that the scope and the scale of the challenges that FDR faced, the Great Depression, the growing menace of fascism, the deep polarized divides in America as he came into office, are not dissimilar from what Joe Biden is going to face. The greatest recession since the Great Depression, deadliest pandemic since 1918, growing fascism, not just around the world, but here in the United States. And then climate, the single greatest challenge that humanity has ever faced, bar none. And it really will require an FDR level response. And we think about all of the agencies that he created, the way he harnessed this nation's economy to that public common purpose that we had of getting out of the Depression and then fighting fascism everywhere around the world. I really think it's going to be that level of harnessing, just every aspect of GDP, of our economy, of our democracy. And it's got to happen through elections. And it also has to be buttressed or supported by public will, engaged activism. We were talking earlier about maybe Democrats sometimes are guilty of resting on their laurels. We win the 2008 presidential election, game over, everybody go home and just watch Barack Obama save the world. And what really needed to happen is we win that, and then we go even harder on offense, and we pick up state legislative seats and attorney generals and secretaries of state and U.S. Senate seats. And that's what we need right now. And we need to produce the kind of majorities that FDR was able to work with. So, you ask a question, we can't dismantle the filibuster until we get to 60. We're not probably going to get to 60 unless I'm missing something in 2020. But there's 2022, there's 2024. And as we know, on an issue like climate, we have to take immediate, important, significant action in those first days, and certainly in the first 100 days, but it will take years to really enact an agenda this ambitious and this aspirational. And that's going to require these majorities. One quick note on why John Rosenthal, State Representative John Rosenthal's race is so important, why Janet Dudding, Angela Brewer's race, these other state house races. Texas, as you all probably know, is about to get 3 new congressional districts after this 2020 census. They will be drawn in 2021. We'll also redraw every political boundary in the state rep, state Senate, US Congress. If we want to produce those kinds of permanent majorities or majorities for the foreseeable future for the agenda that we're talking about right now, we need a Democratic majority in the state house. This will decide the future, not just of Texas, but of the country for the next 10 years. No state will have this kind of outsized influence as Texas. So this is all connected, state house to White House, local elections to climate change policy on a federal level.
Great, thank you, Beto. And I understand you have an event after this, so we'll go two more questions. One of them I'm going to combine two and cheat a little bit. And this has to do, again, with Texas being such a big oil and gas state. So Tim Krisiak asks about Biden's plan to employ 250,000 workers to plug abandoned wells and reduce methane leakage, which would be great for Texas. Would love your thoughts on that. And kind of in the same vein, some of us are watching very closely the Railroad Commission race with Krista Castaneda. Right now, she has a $500,000 match available for contributions. Obviously, that regulatory entity is critical for regulating oil and gas. So how optimistic are you that that's actually we'll be able to see her victorious?
I'm so glad that you mentioned Kristen. I was going to include her in whatever closing remarks I made. You know, I've talked a lot about the importance of the state house. We're all here because of the importance of the presidential election. But not a lot of people know that the railroad commissioner has very little to do with railroads in Texas and everything to do with energy policy in this state. And in this race, there are two things in our favor. First and most important is Krista Castaneda, I've had a chance to meet her, had a chance to do events with her. She's extraordinary, someone who's going to make us so proud as the next railroad commissioner for the state of Texas. And on almost any issue that anyone on this call can bring up, she's going to have an excellent answer and a great plan to make Texas a leader nationally, internationally. The second thing in our favor is she's running against a guy who has violated the law and has come under investigation for the very activities that the Railroad Commission investigates, oversees, and enforces against. I mean, he's exactly the problem in Texas, and not just from a Democrat saying he's a problem, but literally from a law enforcement perspective or regulatory perspective. So if you are able to help Krista Castaneda, not only can she get the message out about the aspirational, ambitious agenda that she has for Texas, but she can also connect the dots for voters about what happens if the Republican candidate wins and what that means for the air that we breathe, the water that we drink, the soil upon which we depend. And the fact that Texas right now is seeing such a high rate of death, and especially amongst communities of color, because of our failure to regulate or to enforce the regulations that we already have on the books. She needs the resources to get that across. So I really appreciate you bringing up Krista Castaneda for Railroad Commissioner. In terms of this opportunity with methane and what we can do in the transmission and at the wells, it's really interesting. You talk to workers within the industry. You talk to the executives within the oil and gas industry. They all acknowledge the problem and they all agree upon the science. I mean, methane is so much worse for our atmosphere than carbon dioxide. The compounding effects of what it does when it comes to climate change, it should be, maybe first on the list of things that we clean up here in Texas. And we are just such a terrible emitter of methane. And the process to control those emissions is not that hard. But here's what I hear, and this is actually where Krista comes in, and Joe Biden at the state and the federal level. What these different operators and companies tell me is, there's no enforcement, Beto. There's no clear regulation on this. I'm not going to invest in controlling methane emissions if my competitor doesn't have to. Once there's a level playing field, they all tell me, we're going to do it because it'll be the law, it'll be enforced, and it's the right thing to do. We all agree that this is a real problem, but we're not going to tie one hand behind our backs while our competitors are able to do whatever they want. So there's a super easy fix to that. And it involves enforcing the law and then winning these two important elections that we're talking about, or three important elections: state house, railroad commissioner, and president. We then have the regulatory, additional regulation if we need it. And then we have the regulatory enforcement from these three levels of government. So thanks for the question. Important issue.
Thanks, Beto. And we have so many good questions. I hate having to limit it, but I know you're short on time. So I'll ask you one that's probably top of all of our minds now. Looking ahead to voting. Obviously, you've got a lot of great phone banking efforts. So does the Biden campaign. Do you have some suggestions on how we can help get the vote out locally, how we make sure it's done safely, how we spread the word, whether it's absentee voting, voting early, or voting in person on election day? What do you recommend that we tell our colleagues and our networks?
There's this really interesting spirit that is animating the work that so many of us are doing right now, and the way that so many people across this country and certainly in Texas feel, which is, everyone on this call, of course, is committed to voting, and they're probably going to talk to their friends and family members and neighbors and colleagues and classmates and the folks they see on social media about it, right? And they're going to donate to the Biden Victory Fund, and they're going to help Krista Castañeda and these amazing state House rep candidates. But they want to do more. It's not enough, most of us feel, to vote and to donate and to like something on Facebook. We really want to do the tough work necessary to win this. And so, Powered by People, our organization, for example, I mentioned we've made 30 million voter contact attempts in the state of Texas. Those contact attempts were all made by volunteers. No one got paid to make those contact attempts, to pick up a phone and call a total stranger and introduce yourself and say, hey, Vanessa, are you committed to voting for Democrats up and down the ballot? Great. Let me tell you about John Rosenthal, who is running to serve you in a second term in the state house. And let me tell you about Joe Biden and what he's going to do for you in your life. And then getting them to vote on the first day of early voting, October 13th. That's just a patriotic American who's willing to give 2.5 hours of her night. And we actually have a phone bank tonight to do just this work, to connect with the people who are going to decide the outcome of the most important election of our lives. And so here's my advice to anyone who's feeling that spirit and says, you know what, I'm planning on voting, and I'm doing all the outrage I can possibly do on Twitter, but it just is not satisfying. I want to do more. Do these phone banks with us. And I'll give you a caveat or disclaimer up front. They're hard. They can really suck. I mean, you're calling people and they're eating dinner. They don't want to talk to you. You get a wrong number because these lists haven't been called before, because we've left this work undone for decades, really, in Texas. You get some Trump supporters along the way. But you're also going to connect with people, and I mentioned at the outset, Latinos, African Americans, communities of color have been actively suppressed and estranged from our democracy in Texas for the last 144 years. When you call someone who has been counted out or written off or taken for granted, and you invite them into our democracy, their democracy, that connection you make is so powerful and so profound. And more than any TV ad they're going to see, more than any slick piece of mail that comes in and lands on their kitchen counter, more than anything they see on Facebook and Twitter, that's going to make an impact that they will not forget. And it really improves our chances of winning these elections. So the work is hard. It is not easy, but it is so necessary. And we would love to have your help. Again, the organization is called Powered by People. We are identifying, registering, and turning out Democratic voters and voters who will vote for Democrats in the state of Texas ahead of these important elections. And we have a phone bank tonight for 2.5 hours, starting at 6:30 Central Time. We'd love to have you all on. So you all are doing great work. So grateful, Vanessa, that you invited me to be part of this. Really, really excited for what Rick is going to share with everyone. And also just super grateful to all the candidates who are running and putting themselves out there right now. Thanks for including us, and thanks to everyone who's on the call.
Thank you, Beto. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for taking the time, spending your afternoon, part of your afternoon with us. And we're going to keep working hard for you, working hard for all the Democrats, and working hard for Joe Biden. So thank you.
Let's do it. Adios.
All right, so next we're going to turn our attention to Rick Duke. He's a consultant and a Brookings Senior Fellow. He served as Special Assistant to President Obama, helping to craft and implement the Climate Action Plan, including defining the 2025 emissions reduction target for the Paris Agreement, negotiating the Kigali Amendment on hydrofluorocarbons to the Montreal Protocol, and authoring the U.S. mid-century strategy for deep decarbonization. Previously, he served as Deputy Assistant Secretary at DOE, and he worked at the National Resources Defense Council and at McKinsey. He has a PhD from Princeton, and he's got some really interesting remarks to share with us today. So Rick, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Vanessa, and thanks, Beto, for your leadership and for making time for this call. And really, above all, thanks to everybody for donating to this fundraiser and more broadly to doing what you can to make Joe Biden our next president. I can tell you on climate, as on so many things, there's no alternative. We have to get this done. I just want to cover briefly three main themes, and I'll start with some international context, say a word about what the Biden team is going to do for us on a national level, and then close with some thoughts on what it means for Texas. On the international front, the good news is that the architecture to make headway on climate globally is already in place, and Joe Biden knows how to make it work. There is no substitute for American leadership on global climate progress or on any other diplomatic endeavor for that matter. And I just want to give you a quick sense of what that looks like. So under the Obama administration, President Obama spent an immense amount of time, scarce time, and an administration effort to get the Paris Agreement done and this Kigali Amendment to the Montreal Protocol. And I want to just tell you a quick word about what that looks like and what it takes to make it happen. In the Paris Agreement, among other things, President Obama stood next to President Xi of China in late 2014, and China made a historic announcement. For the first time, they committed to peak their emissions and to more than double the share of energy that they get from carbon-free sources by 2030. And then they went ahead and started doing that. They started investing at an extraordinary world-leading scale in renewables. They made a commitment to stop building new coal-fired generation. And real progress was made. They had, for the first time in decades, level CO2 emissions from 2014 to 2016. Similarly, on the Kigali Amendment that Vanessa mentioned, and for which I was the White House point, we had 3 years of throwing everything we could think of at the effort to get the amendment done to the Montreal Protocol to deal with these HFCs, super pollutants for greenhouse gases. They're in our air conditioners and a range of other products, but there are great substitutes available. And American industry supports this amendment to the Montreal Protocol that we secured in 2016 with their backing. This single agreement can cut 0.3 to 0.4 centigrade of global warming as a single, very cost-effective, extraordinarily cheap effort that our industry and 13 Republican senators are supportive of, on record supporting ratifying this amendment. And yet it hasn't happened. It hasn't happened because Donald Trump doesn't want it to as an ideological matter. There's no rational reason to oppose it. There's every reason to get it done. And yet he refuses to do it, just like he has rolled back Obama era regulations on vehicles and on mercury from power plants in a way that goes far beyond what industry wants and that is in fact disorienting to investors. And so we've got what we need internationally to make progress quickly on climate change, but we're going to falter badly on this agenda if Donald Trump gets a second term. And we're seeing that already in the case of China, the crucial case of China, which of course has double our emissions. They're the world's worst polluter. And their emissions started to go up again in 2017. And in fact, you see that they have policies underlying that, where without the US pushing and without enough global momentum, they started building coal-fired power plants again, and they stopped investing in renewables at the scale they were before, among other things. And so we've got to get the US leading again on climate. Can't continue tearing down international agreements that US industry and the public and the world support. And Joe Biden knows how to get that all done. Just briefly, what will Biden do in terms of national policy? Well, he's committed very clearly to ambitious and achievable goals, including 100% clean power by 2035 and net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2050. And that's exactly what the science says we need to do. And he's got up to $2 trillion in low carbon investment planned and strong standards in order to make that happen, with at least 40% of the benefits going to disadvantaged communities. And crucially, he's made it very clear that he's going to put in place the measures required to ensure through trade diplomacy and trade measures that as we do this, we don't see any offshoring of American jobs and industry to polluting countries that don't act on climate. But instead, we've got muscular trade policies in place so that we can onshore jobs, grow our economy, and avoid any kind of international carbon leakage. Well, so what does this all mean for Texas? I mean, the short story is that Texas has always been an energy leader, an energy superpower, really, in the US and even global context. And Texas has a track record of success. Many of you probably helped make it happen on things like wind power, where with smart market design and a ratepayer-based charge that funded transmission, Texas jumped up to being the equivalent to the 5th largest country in the world in terms of wind, and 40% of its power comes from clean sources, carbon-free sources today. It's incredibly impressive. At the same time, and on the other hand, Texas is the biggest greenhouse gas emitter in the US, and its emissions are equivalent roughly to those of Germany. And with the oil and gas industry inevitably declining globally as the world takes climate change ever more seriously, Texas can't afford to just sit on the sidelines on this transition to a low carbon global economy. Under a second term, that's exactly what would happen, a second Trump term. In contrast, and just to wrap up, under a Biden administration, you would see a surge of investment in low carbon transformation in Texas. And with that, you'd have faster recovery from this pandemic recession, and you'd have durable gains in job growth in the economy, above all else in Texas. Quick sense of what that looks like. I'm a co-author on a Princeton study that's coming out shortly. It shows that to get this done, we'll need over $130 billion in investment in Texas alone, in this decade alone, in wind and solar and transmission to be on track to what's needed. And on top of that, there's investment required in Texas in transformation of industry, transformation of electrifying buildings and vehicles, and beyond. And all that adds up to jobs. So the Princeton study, this Net Zero Americas project, shows that there'll be 1 million extra jobs nationwide in this decade as we make this transition if we're doing it right, and Joe Biden will do it right. And Texas will thereby actually gain jobs and will be continue to be the national leader in clean energy jobs, in energy jobs more broadly, and now clean energy jobs. So just to wrap up, we have the international agreements that we need to succeed. Joe Biden has a clear plan, both domestically and diplomatically, to lead again on climate. And with Joe Biden in the White House, Texas can transform from a fossil energy powerhouse to a clean energy powerhouse. So thanks for the opportunity to speak with you today, and I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Rick. Appreciate those remarks. And yeah, we have a tremendous opportunity, and frankly, our first step is to undo the damage that's been done by this administration. And so having a clear path to do that is certainly good to hear. I want to go to a question that actually came up while Beto was speaking, and this, I think, falls right in your wheelhouse. When it comes to carbon policy, what would it take, this is from Tim Krisiak, what would it take to get a revenue neutral carbon tax passed here in the US? Or are there other sort of carbon specific reduction policies that might gain some traction, even if it isn't a revenue neutral type policy?
It's a great question. It's a challenging question. I will say that the pandemic recession is so profound and so important to address that I think the Biden administration is right to put the emphasis right now on this $2 trillion investment in low carbon infrastructure. We need to do that because it's the right thing to do for climate, and because it's the right thing to do for the economy. And you look at the Great Recession that Obama inherited from Bush, and it took a decade to claw back to full employment from that. And in part, that's because the stimulus was underpowered. So we need to make sure that we don't repeat that mistake, and that we get the full scale of investment, including specifically in low carbon infrastructure, quickly and in a sustained way to build back better and faster. Now, at the same time, it is important that we also look at measures beyond that, standards, congressional and regulatory. And there are a lot of opportunities and indeed obligations under existing law to put in place standards, such as requirements to control methane from oil and gas operations, things that the Trump administration is unwinding that the Obama administration had started to put in place. And then ultimately we need Congress, including 60 votes under current rules, to pull it together and do the right thing, which every economist anywhere will tell you ultimately includes this kind of carbon pricing or similar measures to have the right incentives, above all else in industry, where, to be clear, it's particularly hard to get the job done in transforming industry without those kinds of flexible economy-wide measures. So at the end of the day, we need to do exactly what we're doing on this call, which is prioritize clean energy and climate politically, and make sure that not just for this presidential race, which is so crucial, but for Senate races across the country, and not just this cycle, but next cycle, we make it higher and higher on the agenda.
Agreed. Agreed. So kind of harkening back to your experience in the Obama administration, what lessons can we take from the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, and particularly those in clean energy, research and development, how to apply these to an economic stimulus that helps both grow our industry and reduce emissions?
Yeah, fantastic question. And it's incredibly timely given that we're grappling with the mismanagement of COVID and the really severe economic harm that it is creating. And the right answer for that really is economic investment, fiscal stimulus, and low carbon infrastructure above all else. What we saw from the nearly 90 billion in clean energy investment from the American Reinvestment and Recovery Act was huge, enduring benefits. So it started with a resurgence in wind and solar. I see in the chat some reference to the PTC ITC, and we had, as part of that package, a jolt to wind and solar that was incredibly important in transforming our power sector in Texas and nationally. But we also saw innovation in things like battery technologies that was incredibly important. And I would just note that there's always politics around this, and so there was wholly unfair and overblown attention to the fact that some of the loan program grants, in particular the Solyndra project, ended up not panning out. But people forget and don't pay attention to the fact that one of those grantees was Tesla, which is now a global leader in electric vehicles. And so huge innovation, huge market transformation momentum came out of $90 billion in the American Reinvestment and Recovery Act. Imagine what $2 trillion could do in terms of buying a clean, better future, and also getting us back to full employment and robust growth much faster.
Absolutely. We have time for just two more questions. And the last one was from Andy Barnes. So thank you for that, Andy. Jeff asks about storage. And, a tricky thing here in Texas, of course, is the fact that ERCOT is not FERC jurisdictional. But is there anything that the Biden administration can do that helps spur the storage market here in Texas?
There are lots of levers when you start having large-scale economic stimulus in particular. So there is no doubt that the ARA program back in 2009 and 2010 helped transform technology for batteries through all the related investments. And we saw just extraordinary gains led by American innovators in battery costs. And with that, we get the EV revolution that we're seeing now, and storage on the grid and all these other benefits. And so I would say, above all else, prioritizing storage technology development, including just deploying what we have now so we can learn by doing and bring down costs through scale, is an incredible opportunity as part of this next package of stimulus that we hope to get. I will just also say, to be clear, that Joe Biden, unfortunately, will not be able to get a large low-carbon stimulus package in place if we don't also flip the Senate. So please also focus on that in our final running through the tape here. But with the Democratic Senate and Joe Biden, I can guarantee you that there will be a strong priority on investing in scale up of battery through that stimulus program, in batteries and storage as part of that stimulus program. to your point, there's limited ability to directly affect Texas through FERC in any way. Really, the president can only affect FERC through appointments. But I will say that at a national scale, you can be confident that a Biden administration will put the right people on the FERC commission and make sure that FERC is helping with market development for storage as well.
Great. And last question, and this may draw on some of the connections you still have working now in the Biden campaign, is the interconnection seams study on their radar? Is Biden aware? I know he's gotten very well educated on transmission generally, but in terms of the benefits of interconnecting the grids and realizing the benefits there and deploying more renewable resources, the benefits both in terms of economic development and carbon reduction are measurable. Is this something that they're looking at and taking seriously?
Well, I can tell you that from working with Joe Biden when he was vice president, that he is the genuine article when it comes to caring about climate change and caring about transmission as part of that. He was directly engaged on efforts that I was driving to try to push through key transmission projects for renewables. And he cares immensely about these topics. I can't tell you what he thinks about this specific issue, but it's clear that it matters immensely and that it would be incredibly beneficial in the ways that you're describing. And I'm sure that Joe Biden and whoever it is that forms his top team on climate will want to advance that cause.
Great. Well, Rick, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us this afternoon. This has been super enlightening, and as you can tell, we have kind of a wonky policy audience here, but we're all very eager to help get Biden over the finish line, flip the Senate, and make these clean energy policies happen. So what I'd like to do at this point, we have a special treat. We have a couple of House candidates that Beto mentioned earlier at the beginning, who I'd like to give an opportunity just to introduce themselves. These are two candidates who have been recognized by the Climate Cabinet, which is dedicated to both educating and promoting candidates who are strong on climate issues. So first up, we have Janet Dudding, who is running for the 14th district. And then Angela Brewer will follow, who's running for the 64th district. So Angela, you want to introduce yourself? I'm sorry.
Hey.
There you are.
Hey, it's good to see you. Thanks so much, Vanessa. I love that you just called your audience a wonky policy audience. Those are my very favorite kinds of audiences. So I'm really thrilled to be joining you for a few minutes this afternoon and hear the really inspiring words from Beto and from Rick and thinking forward and thinking for the potential for growth and all of the great things we can do to affect climate change and to build green energy in Texas if we just change our leadership. That's why I'm in this race in House District 64. And I just wanted to tell you a couple of things about House District 64 that I think really highlight the problem of our current fossil fuel dependency and really highlight the potential for green energy. First, House District 64 is primarily the city of Denton and some of our surrounding communities, and we sit right on the edge of the Barnett Shale. And so we are one of the leading edges of natural gas fracking in the state of Texas. I call us guinea pigs here in Denton, that we were a place where the oil and gas industry came in and really pursued fracking aggressively in our community. There really is, there are 2 natural gas wells within a mile of my house, and that's true for most of our city. We actually, in 2014, citizens of our community got together and voted to ban fracking in the city of Denton. Then in 2015, our Texas legislature got together and said, no, Denton, you can't do that. So one of the reasons I'm running for the Texas legislature now is that Austin needs to keep their nose out of local politics when our local communities and our citizens are coming together to try and address issues like climate change and the damage that the production of this natural gas here in our community is causing. We have some of the worst air quality in the state. We know the future for our water supply is very poor because of all the wells that are here in town. So in HD64, we have a perfect example of the problem we're currently facing. We also are a great place to talk about the potential of green energy. We're the home to 2 universities here in Denton, about 55,000 college students here in Denton. And there is just enormous potential for that job creation that Vice President Biden and Beto and Rick were talking about, that we have a chance here with our universities to really be leaders in research and development and the innovation that's needed to really carry forward ideas and policies about green energy and and creating a new economic powerhouse for the state of Texas, so that we can get away from the dirty old stuff and move into the clean stuff going forward. So I'm really excited to get down to the Texas House so we can start putting the policy work in place that will allow communities like mine to make the changes we want to make to affect our environment in a positive way, and so that we can really invest in the research and development and the job creation that green jobs have the potential for in our community. So thanks for being here. Thanks for supporting this cause and fighting every day against climate change.
Thanks, Angela. And I'm glad you brought that up. It seems that Republicans favor local control until they don't. So thanks for continuing to fight the good fight there. Janet, let's turn it over to you.
Hi, I'm Janet Dudding. I'm running for Texas House in Bryan and College Station, which is the home of Texas A&M University. And Texas A&M University is a top-tier research institute. We have climate scientists, climate experts from all over the world right here in Bryan College Station. But the man that we've elected 5 times doesn't know about climate change. I don't think he believes in climate change. He's certainly not listening to anyone about climate change. Climate change is real, it's real expensive, and it's real personal to me. We moved here after Hurricane Katrina's 32-foot storm surge destroyed our coastal community. It was the most expensive storm on record, but not anymore. I think Harvey holds that record now. Yeah, we had 2 storms coming up into the Gulf a couple of weeks ago, and now I think there are 5 coming in from the Atlantic coming in. Climate change, we have got to do something. We have got to do something now. It is time for a change. It's time for a woman to get in there and roll up her sleeves. I agree with Angela 100%. We've got the technology, we've got the know-how, we've got the expertise right here in Bryan College Station. Let's do it. It's time to get busy. Thank y'all for letting me join. I love a wonky audience. It has been so much fun to hear about methane and to hear about all of these other things, because methane is low-hanging fruit. If we just tax the flare, maybe we can incentivize getting rid of the flare. Thank you for letting me join.
Absolutely. Thank you, Janet. And I love the Janet for the Planet moniker. That's fantastic.
It's personal to me. Thank you.
Absolutely.